In the small town of Clearwood, where everyone knew everyone and secrets rarely stayed buried, a storm was brewing that no one could have predicted. It started as a seemingly ordinary afternoon at the local park, a place where kids laughed, dogs barked, and the air carried the scent of freshly cut grass. But for 14-year-old Nia, what unfolded that day would change her life forever and send shockwaves through the entire town. Nia was vibrant and full of life, the kind of kid who could light up a room with a smile. Her mother, Vanessa Carter, wasn't just her mom. She was a force of nature, a woman who'd risen to become the town's first black mayor, breaking barriers and earning respect through sheer grit and unwavering integrity. Vanessa believed in fairness, justice, and doing what was right, values she worked hard to instill in Nia. But no amount of lessons or pep talks could prepare them for what happened next. Nia had been out with friends that afternoon, her backpack slung over her shoulder, her favorite book tucked inside. She'd stopped by a park bench to rest, eating a granola bar as she texted her mom to let her know she'd be home soon. That's when it happened. A uniformed police officer, someone sworn to protect and serve, approached her with a look that made her uneasy. His name was Officer Grant, a man whose stern reputation in the community was whispered about but rarely confronted. He accused Nia of littering, pointing to a crumpled wrapper on the ground. Nia's voice shook as she tried to explain it wasn't hers, that she hadn't dropped anything. But he wasn't listening. The officer's gaze was cold, his tone sharp as he demanded she pick it up and eat it, his words slicing through the air like a knife. Nia froze, her heart pounding in her chest. "Eat it," she repeated, disbelief lacing her voice. Her friends, standing a few feet away, looked on in stunned silence, too scared to intervene. When she hesitated, Officer Grant loomed closer, his voice rising. "I said eat it. Now." Tears welled in Nia's eyes as she looked around, hoping someone, anyone, would step in. But the park had grown eerily still, the usual hum of life drowned out by the heavy weight of the moment. She could feel the heat of humiliation burning her cheeks, the world around her closing in. She didn't know what to do. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just about a piece of garbage. It was about power, control, and the quiet, insidious racism she'd grown up hearing about, but never thought she'd experienced so directly. What Officer Grant didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Nia's mother, Vanessa, was just a phone call away. And Vanessa wasn't the kind of person to let injustice slide. When Nia stumbled through the front door that evening, her face streaked with tears and her voice trembling as she recounted what had happened, Vanessa's world came to a halt. Her daughter, her bright, brave, beautiful girl, had been humiliated in a way that cut deep. Vanessa listened intently, her hands gripping the edge of the kitchen counter as anger bubbled beneath her calm exterior. This wasn't just about Nia. It was about every child, every person in their community who'd been silenced, dismissed, or mistreated because of the color of their skin. She knew she couldn't let this slide. Not as a mother, not as a mayor. What happened next would spark a battle that reached far beyond the borders of their small town. It would test the limits of justice, community, and resilience, bringing secrets to light that some had worked hard to keep hidden. But for now, in this quiet moment in their kitchen, Vanessa pulled Nia into her arms and made a silent vow. They would fight back, together, and the world would listen. Vanessa didn't sleep that night. The kitchen lights stayed on long after Nia had gone to bed, her tears finally giving way to the soft rhythm of sleep. But Vanessa's mind raced, replaying her daughter's words over and over again. She felt anger, yes, but beneath that was a deep ache, a pain that came from knowing her daughter had been forced to endure something so cruel. It wasn't just about what had been done, it was about the message behind it. The message that said, asterisk, you don't belong, you don't matter, asterisk. Vanessa sat at the table, staring at the mug of tea in front of her that had long gone cold. This wasn't the first time she'd heard whispers about Officer Grant. He'd been in Clearwood for years, and while his record was clean on paper, Vanessa had always sensed something off about him. Residents of the predominantly black neighborhood on the east side of town had murmured stories, minor traffic stops that turned into harsh interrogations, stern lectures that felt more like threats, but nothing had ever stuck. Complaints were filed and quietly dismissed, explanations given that sounded reasonable enough to those who weren't paying close attention. But Vanessa was paying attention now, because this time, it wasn't just any child, it was her child, and she wasn't going to let it slide. The next morning, Vanessa called a meeting with her closest advisors. Her chief of staff, Evelyn, a no-nonsense woman who'd been by her side since her first campaign, arrived at Vanessa's house before sunrise. Evelyn listened carefully as Vanessa recounted what Nia had told her. The lines of her face grew taut, her usual calm demeanor hardening into something Vanessa rarely saw: anger. "This is serious, Vanessa," Evelyn said, her voice steady but firm. "We can't let this go. If he's willing to do something like this in public, in broad daylight, to a child, imagine what he's done behind closed doors." Vanessa nodded, her jaw tightening. "I'm not just imagining, Evelyn. I know. I've heard the stories, warnings. I didn't act then because I didn't have proof. But now—" Her voice broke for a moment, but she quickly steadied herself. "Now it's personal." By mid-morning, Vanessa was at City Hall, a place that usually felt like a second home, but now seemed cold and unwelcoming. As she walked through the corridors, her heels clicking against the polished floors, she felt the weight of her responsibility pressing down on her. She wasn't just a mother seeking justice for her daughter. She was the mayor, and how she handled this would set a precedent for the entire town. But before Vanessa could take any official action, she needed to know more. She called in a favor from an old friend, Marcus, a journalist who'd spent years uncovering corruption in small-town governments. Marcus was the kind of person who could find a needle in a haystack, or, in this case, a pattern in a pile of seemingly unrelated complaints. When Marcus arrived at her office later that day, his laptop tucked under one arm, he didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I pulled what I could on Officer Grant," he said, setting his laptop on Vanessa's desk and opening a folder filled with notes and documents. "You're not going to like what I found." Vanessa leaned forward, her heart pounding as Marcus began to lay out the details. There were reports of excessive force, instances of verbal abuse, and even a few cases where Officer Grant had been accused of planting evidence. Most of the complaints had been dismissed, marked as unsubstantiated, but there were too many to ignore. And then there were the videos, grainy cell phone clips taken by bystanders, showing a pattern of behavior that was as clear as it was disturbing. "This isn't just about Nia," Marcus said, his tone serious. "This guy has been a problem for years, and from what I can tell, he's been protected. Someone's been making sure these complaints don't go anywhere." Vanessa felt a chill run down her spine. Protected by who? She asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. Marcus hesitated. "That's the part I'm still digging into. But it's clear he's got connections. And if you're planning to go after him, you need to be ready. This isn't going to be easy." Vanessa sat back in her chair, her mind racing. She'd thought of Nia, of the way her voice had trembled as she recounted what happened. This wasn't just about holding one man accountable. It was about exposing a system that allowed him to operate unchecked. But she also knew Marcus was right. Taking on someone like Officer Grant, especially if he had powerful allies, wouldn't be easy. It would mean risking her reputation, her career, and possibly even her safety. But Vanessa had made up her mind. She couldn't let fear stop her. Not this time. Meanwhile, word of the incident was already starting to spread. Nia's friends had told their parents, and soon the story was being whispered about in coffee shops and at school drop-offs. Some people were outraged, others skeptical. "There's no way a cop would make a kid eat garbage," one man said at the local diner, shaking his head. "Sounds like an exaggeration to me." But others weren't so quick to dismiss it. "You don't know what it's like," one woman shot back. "You don't know what we've been dealing with for years." By the time Vanessa stepped out of her office that afternoon, the air in Clearwood felt different. There was a tension, a sense that something big was about to happen. She could see it in the way people looked at her as she walked to her car, their eyes filled with a mix of hope and curiosity. Vanessa knew she was standing at a crossroads. She could let the moment pass, let the whispers fade, and carry on with business as usual. Or she could step into the fight, knowing full well it might cost her everything. As she drove home that evening, the sun dipping low on the horizon, Vanessa made a silent promise to herself. She would fight for her daughter, for her community, for everyone who'd ever been made to feel small or powerless. Because this wasn't just about justice, it was about change. And Vanessa was ready to make it happen, no matter what it took. The next morning, Vanessa found herself sitting at the breakfast table with Nia, who was quietly stirring her cereal. The usual sparkle in her daughter's eyes was dim, and it broke Vanessa's heart. She reached over, resting a hand gently on Nia's arm. "How are you feeling today, sweetheart?" Vanessa asked softly. Nia shrugged, her gaze fixed on the bowl in front of her. "I don't know," she mumbled. I don't want to go to school. Everyone's going to be talking about it." Vanessa nodded, understanding the weight Nia carried. "If you need to stay home today, that's okay," she said. "But remember, you don't have to be ashamed. You didn't do anything wrong." Nia looked up at her mom, her eyes brimming with tears. "I know, but it feels like I did. He made me feel so small, like I didn't matter." Vanessa's chest tightened. She took a deep breath, trying to keep her emotions in check. "You do matter, Nia. More than anything. And I promise you, we're going to make this right." Later that day, Vanessa sat down with Evelyn and Marcus in her office. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with unspoken concerns. Evelyn had already begun drafting a formal statement, but Vanessa wasn't ready to release anything just yet. She wanted to be strategic, to make sure every step she took was calculated and deliberate. "We need to know exactly who we're up against," Vanessa said, glancing at Marcus. "You said Officer Grant might have connections. Can you find out who's been protecting him?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "It's not going to be easy. People like Grant don't operate alone, but the ones backing him are usually good at covering their tracks. It's going to take time, and probably a few risks, to dig deep enough." Evelyn cut in, her voice sharp. "Time is a luxury we don't have. The community is already talking, and if we wait too long, it'll look like we're not doing anything. We need to take action now." Vanessa nodded. She knew Evelyn was right, but she also understood the stakes. One wrong move could derail everything. "Then we'll do both," she said firmly. "Marcus, you keep digging. Evelyn, let's start with an internal review of the police department. I want to see every complaint filed against Officer Grant in the past 10 years. While Vanessa worked tirelessly to build her case, the story began to take on a life of its own. Local reporters caught wind of the incident, and soon the story was on the front page of the Clearwood Gazette. The headline read, "Asterisk Mayor's Daughter a Center of Controversy with Local Officer Asterisk." The article was careful not to take sides, but the comments section told a different story. Some readers were outraged, calling for Officer Grant to be fired. Others dismissed the incident as an overreaction, claiming Vanessa was using her position to push an agenda. Vanessa tried not to let the negativity get to her, but it wasn't easy. She had always known that being in the public eye came with challenges, but this felt different. It felt personal. Meanwhile, Officer Grant remained silent. The police department issued a generic statement saying the matter was under investigation, but there was no acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Vanessa couldn't help but wonder what Grant was thinking, if he regretted his actions, or if he was confident he'd walk away unscathed. As days turned into a week, the tension in Clearwood only grew. Protests began forming outside the police station, with signs reading *Justice for Nia* and *End Abuse of Power* at the same time. A smaller group of counter-protesters gathered, holding signs that said *Support Our Officers* and *Stop the Witch Hunt*. Vanessa watched the scenes unfold from her office window, her heart heavy. She knew this wasn't just about her daughter anymore. It was about something much bigger, a long-standing divide in their community that had finally reached a boiling point. Amid the chaos, Vanessa received an anonymous tip. It came in the form of a plain white envelope slid under her office door. Inside was a single piece of paper with a typed message. Asterisk check the bodycam footage from July 14th, 2020 asterisk. Vanessa's pulse quickened as she read the note. She immediately called Evelyn and Marcus into her office, showing them the message. "Do you think it's real?" Evelyn asked, her brow furrowed. Marcus nodded. "It could be. If there's something on that footage, it might be the smoking gun we need." Vanessa didn't waste any time. She made a formal request for the bodycam footage, citing her authority as mayor. The process wasn't easy. There were layers of bureaucracy and resistance, but eventually the footage was released. What Vanessa saw confirmed her worst fears. The video showed Officer Grant pulling over a young black man for a broken taillight. The man was polite and cooperative, but Grant's demeanor was aggressive from the start. The footage captured him berating the man, accusing him of being involved in criminal activity without any evidence. At one point, Grant even reached for his holster, despite there being no threat. Vanessa's hands trembled as she paused the video. This is exactly what we've been talking about," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn nodded grimly. "And it's not just one incident. There's a pattern here, Vanessa. We need to expose it." But Vanessa knew the stakes were higher now. Releasing the footage would escalate the situation, potentially putting her and her family in danger. She glanced at a photo of Nia on her desk, her resolve hardening. "We release it," she said firmly. "The truth needs to come out." As they prepared to go public with the footage, Vanessa couldn't shake the feeling that they were only scratching the surface. She couldn't help but wonder who had sent the anonymous tip, and what other secrets were lurking beneath the surface of Clearwood's seemingly quiet exterior. For now, all she could do was move forward, knowing that the battle was far from over. The footage made its way to the public in a carefully orchestrated press conference. Vanessa stood at the podium, her face calm, but her voice carrying a steel edge as she addressed the crowd. Cameras flashed and reporters leaned forward, their pens poised, waiting for her words. "This is not just about my daughter," Vanessa began, her tone deliberate. "This is about a pattern of behavior that has gone unchecked for far too long. It's about a system that protects individuals who abuse their power, while the people they're sworn to serve are left to suffer." Behind her, a screen played the bodycam footage. The room was silent except for the occasional gasp as the scenes unfolded. The tension was palpable, the weight of what they were seeing sinking in like a stone. Vanessa's hands gripped the edges of the podium as she continued. "I promised to serve this community with integrity and to fight for justice. Today, I'm keeping that promise. This ends now." The press conference set off a firestorm. The video spread across social media like wildfire, sparking outrage and renewed calls for accountability. Protesters filled the streets, their chants echoing through the town. Justice for Nia. No more abuse. The community, once divided, was now united in anger and determination. But not everyone was on board. Vanessa began receiving anonymous threats, emails, phone calls, even a note slipped into her mailbox. They were vague but menacing, warning her to back off and remember her place. She couldn't prove who was behind them, but she had a good idea. The deeper she dug into Officer Grant's history, the more connections she uncovered, connections that led to powerful figures within the police department and even some members of the town council. One night, as Vanessa sat in her living room reviewing files, the house phone rang. It was Marcus. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "Vanessa, I think you need to know something. I've been digging and I found a name, Chief Walker." Vanessa's breath caught. Chief Walker had been with the Clearwood Police Department for over 2 decades. He was respected, even admired, by many in the town. But there had always been rumors whispers of favoritism, backroom deals, and a tendency to turn a blind eye when it suited him. "What about him?" Vanessa asked, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "There's a pattern," Marcus said. Every time someone filed a serious complaint against Grant, it was Chief Walker who signed off on the dismissals. And it's not just Grant. There are others, officers with similar complaints, all swept under the rug. Walker's been protecting them for years. Vanessa's mind raced. If Marcus was right, this wasn't just about one bad officer. It was about an entire system built to shield them, and Chief Walker was at the center of it. The revelation added another layer of complexity to an already volatile situation. Vanessa knew that going after Walker would be like lighting a match in a room full of gasoline. He wasn't just a police chief, he was a symbol of stability for many in the town. Accusing him would mean risking not only her career, but also the fragile unity she'd worked so hard to build. But Vanessa couldn't ignore the truth. The more she learned, the more she realized that exposing Walker was the only way to bring real change. As she prepared to confront him, the atmosphere in Clearwood grew increasingly charged. Protests turned into marches, drawing crowds from neighboring towns. The police station was surrounded by demonstrators holding signs that read *accountability, now and *no justice, no peace. The tension between officers and civilians was palpable, a powder keg waiting to explode. Meanwhile, Nia was struggling to navigate her own reality. She couldn't escape the whispers at school, the sideways glances from classmates who either pitied her or didn't believe her story. She tried to stay strong, but the weight of it all was taking a toll. One evening, as Vanessa sat at the kitchen table, Nia walked in, her expression hesitant. "Mom," she said quietly, "do you ever get scared?" Vanessa looked up, her heart aching at the vulnerability in her daughter's voice. "All the time," she admitted. "But being scared doesn't mean you stop fighting. It means you fight harder." Nia nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I don't want to be scared anymore." Vanessa pulled her into a hug, holding her close. "You're the bravest person I know, Nia. And no matter what happens, we're in this together." The next day, Vanessa scheduled a meeting with Chief Walker. She wanted to give him a chance to explain himself, to take accountability before she made her next move. But as she sat across from him in his office, she realized he had no intention of doing either. Walker was calm, almost dismissive, as Vanessa laid out her concerns. "Mayor Carter," he said, leaning back in his chair, "you're making a lot of assumptions. Officer Grant has always been an exemplary member of this department. These allegations are nothing more than misunderstandings." Vanessa's jaw tightened. "This isn't about misunderstandings, Chief. It's about abuse of power, and I have the evidence to prove it." Walker's expression shifted, a flicker of something cold flashing in his eyes. "Be careful, Vanessa," he said, his voice low. "You're walking a fine line. You don't want to make enemies you can't handle." Vanessa stood, her heart pounding but her resolve unshaken. "The truth doesn't care about enemies, Chief, and neither do I." As she walked out of his office, Vanessa felt the weight of what she'd just done. She knew the battle ahead would be the toughest yet, but she also knew she couldn't back down. The stakes were too high, the cost of silence too great. Outside, the sun was setting, casting the town in hues of orange and gold. But for Vanessa, the light felt more like the calm before a storm that was about to break wide open. As Vanessa left Chief Walker's office, her mind raced with the weight of his warning. The thinly veiled threat replayed in her head, stirring both anger and unease. She had expected resistance, even denial, but the cold, calculated way he had dismissed her concerns felt like a warning bell. It wasn't just about one man or a few bad officers. It was clear now that this was systemic, deeply rooted in the culture of the department. Back at City Hall, Evelyn was waiting for her, pacing anxiously in her office. "Well?" she asked as Vanessa walked in, her tone a mix of hope and trepidation. Vanessa shook her head, dropping into her chair. He denied everything. Worse, he tried to intimidate me. Walker knows we're close to uncovering the truth, and he's not going down without a fight. Evelyn frowned, her lips pressed into a thin line. If he's trying to scare you, that means we're on the right track. But we need more than what we have now. We need something undeniable, something they can't spin or bury. Vanessa nodded, but before she could respond, Marcus burst into the office, his face pale and his expression grim. He closed the door behind him, locking it as he spoke in a low voice. "Vanessa, we've got a problem. A big one." He set his laptop on her desk and pulled up an email he'd received just hours earlier. It was an anonymous tip, much like the first, but this one was far more alarming. Attached was a document, a leaked internal memo from the police department. It outlined a coordinated effort to discredit not just Vanessa, but also anyone who supported her. The language was vague but chilling, referencing necessary measures to protect the department's reputation. Vanessa's stomach turned as she read through the memo. "This isn't just pushback," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "This is a calculated attack." Evelyn leaned over her shoulder, her expression darkening. "They're going after you personally. This could get ugly, Vanessa." Marcus nodded. "It's not just you. The protesters, the community leaders speaking out, they're all targets now. Whoever leaked this is risking a lot to get it to us." Vanessa leaned back in her chair, her mind spinning. The stakes had officially been raised. It wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about survival, both hers and the movement's. As the memo began to circulate among trusted allies, the atmosphere in Clearwood shifted again. The protests grew louder, more defiant, and tensions between the community and the police escalated. Vanessa received word that several protesters had been arrested on flimsy charges, further inflaming the situation. Then the second twist came, an unexpected and shocking revelation. Marcus called Vanessa late one night, his voice urgent. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "I found something buried in the department's budget records. There's a private fund, untraceable on the surface, but clearly used for payouts. Settlements for complaints that never saw the light of day." Vanessa's heart sank. "You're saying they've been paying off victims to stay silent?" "Exactly," Marcus replied, "and it gets worse. Some of those payouts were signed off by the mayor's office during your predecessor's term." The words hit Vanessa like a punch to the gut. Her predecessor, Mayor Langston, had been a respected figure in Clearwood, a mentor of sorts when she first entered politics. To think that he might have been complicit in covering up abuse was almost too much to bear. But the evidence was there, clear as day. Evelyn, who had been listening on speakerphone, spoke up. "This changes everything. If Langston was involved, it's not just a police scandal, it's a political one. This could shake the entire foundation of the town." Vanessa sat in stunned silence, the weight of the revelation settling over her. She thought of Nia, of the promises she had made to her daughter and to the community. This was no longer just about one officer or even one department. It was about exposing a legacy of corruption that had been allowed to fester for years. But the deeper they dug, the more dangerous it became. Vanessa's phone rang constantly, angry voicemails, cryptic warnings, even direct threats. She began noticing unfamiliar cars parked near her house, shadowy figures lingering at public events. Evelyn insisted on hiring security, and Vanessa reluctantly agreed, though it only made her feel more like a target. Amid the chaos, Vanessa found an unexpected ally, a young officer named Elena Cruz. Cruz had been with the department for only a few years, but had already earned a reputation for fairness and integrity. She reached out to Vanessa in secret, offering to share what she knew. "Grant isn't the only problem," Cruz said during their clandestine meeting at a coffee shop on the outskirts of town. "There's a culture here, an us versus them mentality that starts at the top. A lot of officers don't like it, but we're scared to speak up. Walker, he has ways of making people fall in line." Vanessa leaned forward, her voice urgent. "If you're willing to testify, we can protect you." Your voice could make all the difference. Cruz hesitated, her hands trembling slightly as she cradled her coffee cup. I want to help, Mayor Carter, I really do. But you need to understand, Walker has eyes everywhere. If he finds out I'm talking to you, I could lose everything. Vanessa reached across the table, placing a reassuring hand on Cruz's. You're not alone in this. We're going to fight back together. As the meeting ended, Vanessa couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope amid the storm. But she also knew the clock was ticking. Walker and his allies were closing in, and the stakes had never been higher. The question wasn't just whether Vanessa could bring down the corrupt system. It was whether she could do it before it destroyed her first. Vanessa stood in the packed courtroom, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. The atmosphere was electric, the air charged with anticipation. After weeks of gathering evidence, rallying the community, and enduring relentless pushback, this was the moment it all came to a head. Chief Walker sat at the defense table, his expression calm, but his eyes betraying a hint of tension. Officer Grant sat beside him, his jaw clenched. The room was filled with reporters, community members, and protesters who had been following the case closely. Evelyn leaned in, whispering, "This is it, Vanessa. Everything we've worked for comes down to this." Vanessa nodded, her heart pounding. She took a deep breath as the prosecutor, a sharp and determined woman named Amelia Reed, rose to address the court. Amelia began by laying out the case against Officer Grant, his repeated abuses of power, the evidence from his bodycam footage, and the damning testimony from Officer Cruz, who had courageously come forward despite the risks. Cruz's words had been a turning point, painting a vivid picture of a department steeped in corruption and fear. Then, Amelia turned her attention to Chief Walker. "This is not just about one officer," she said, her voice steady but firm. "This is about a system that enabled and protected him. Chief Walker had the power to stop this, to hold his officers accountable. Instead, he chose to cover it up, to shield those who violated their oath to serve and protect." As the prosecutor spoke, Vanessa felt a swell of emotion. This was the truth she'd have fought so hard to uncover, the truth that so many had tried to bury. But as the proceedings continued, a sense of unease began to creep in. Walker's defense team was skilled, their arguments carefully crafted to cast doubt on the evidence. They painted Cruz as a disgruntled employee, suggested the anonymous tips were fabricated, and argued that the leaked budget documents were taken out of context. By the time the defense rested, the room was buzzing with uncertainty. Vanessa glanced at Marcus and Evelyn, their faces reflecting her own apprehension. Had they done enough? The judge called for a brief recess before delivering his decision. Vanessa stepped outside, the cool air doing little to calm her nerves. Nia was waiting for her, standing with a group of friends who had come to support her. Seeing her daughter gave Vanessa the strength she needed to keep going. "Mom," Nia said softly, "no matter what happens, I'm proud of you." Vanessa pulled her into a hug, holding on tightly. "This isn't over yet," she whispered. When court resumed, the judge's expression was unreadable as he addressed the room. He acknowledged the strength of the evidence against Grant and the troubling patterns of behavior within the department. But just as it seemed justice would prevail, the judge announced his ruling. While Officer Grant would face disciplinary action and likely lose his badge, there wasn't enough direct evidence to hold Chief Walker accountable for his role in the cover-up. Gasps filled the room. Vanessa felt like the ground had been pulled out from under her. Walker smirked, his confidence restored as he rose from his seat. He shook hands with his lawyers, clearly savoring the moment. But just as he prepared to leave, another voice rang out, a voice Vanessa hadn't expected to hear. "Wait," came the voice of Mayor Langston, her predecessor. The room fell silent as the older man stood, his expression somber. He walked to the front of the courtroom, his cane tapping against the floor with each step. "I can't stay silent any longer," Langston said, his voice steady but heavy with regret. "Years ago, I approved those payouts. I thought I was doing the right thing, avoiding scandal, protecting the reputation of this town. But I see now that all I did was perpetuate the very system I should have dismantled. The room erupted into murmurs. Langston raised a hand to quiet them. Chief Walker knew exactly what he was doing. He used me, used the trust of this community to cover his tracks. And I have the records to prove it. He handed a stack of documents to the prosecutor, his hands trembling slightly. Vanessa's heart raced as she realized what was happening. Langston was breaking his silence, sacrificing his own reputation to expose the truth. The judge called for order, reviewing the new evidence before announcing that the case against Walker would be reopened. The courtroom buzzed with renewed energy, the tide turning once again. Outside, as reporters swarmed and protesters cheered, Vanessa stood beside Langston. He looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. "I'm sorry I didn't do this sooner," he said. "You did it now," Vanessa replied, "and that's what matters." As the sun set over Clearwood, Vanessa felt a sense of relief for the first time in weeks. The battle wasn't over, but the truth was finally coming to light. And as she looked at Nia, standing strong and proud amid the crowd, she knew they were on the path to real change. The weeks following the courtroom's dramatic turn were a whirlwind of emotions and events for Vanessa and the entire community of Clearwood. The reopened investigation into Chief Walker gained momentum quickly. With Mayor Langston's new evidence and Officer Croz's courageous testimony, the authorities had the ammunition they needed to dig deeper into the years of corruption that had plagued the police department. Vanessa found herself at the center of it all, balancing her responsibilities as mayor, her role as a mother, and her renewed commitment to transparency and justice. Every day brought new challenges, but she approached each one with the same determination that had carried her this far. The community, once fractured, began to heal. People who had been hesitant to speak out now found their voices. Stories poured in, accounts of mistreatment, intimidation, and abuses of power that had been buried for years. Vanessa organized a town hall meeting where residents could share their experiences and ideas for reform. It was a raw, emotional evening, but it also felt like a turning point. One of the speakers was a young woman named Tamara, who had been silent about her own encounter with Officer Grant years earlier. "I was too scared to come forward before," she said, her voice trembling. "But seeing Nia's bravery and yours, Mayor Carter, gave me the courage to finally speak my truth." Vanessa felt a lump in her throat as she listened to Tamara. This was why she had fought so hard. It wasn't just about her daughter or her own family. It was about giving others the chance to reclaim their voices and demand better. Chief Walker's downfall came swiftly. The evidence against him was undeniable, and he resigned before the investigation could lead to formal charges. His departure was both a relief and a sobering reminder of how much work still needed to be done. The town council, under pressure from the community, approved a sweeping series of reforms. Vanessa worked tirelessly with activists, legal experts, and local leaders to create a plan that would ensure accountability within the police department. They introduced mandatory bodycam policies, independent oversight for misconduct complaints, and community-based training programs to rebuild trust. Officer Cruz became a symbol of integrity within the department. Promoted to a leadership role, she spearheaded efforts to mentor new recruits and shift the department's culture toward one of service and respect. Through it all, Nia remained a source of strength and inspiration for Vanessa. The ordeal had taken a toll on her, but it had also revealed her resilience. She started speaking at local schools and community events, sharing her story and encouraging other young people to stand up for what was right. One evening, as Vanessa and Nia sat on the porch watching the sunset, Nia turned to her mother. "Do you think it's really over?" she asked softly. Vanessa thought for a moment before answering. "I think we've won an important battle," she said. "But the fight for justice never really ends. It's something we have to work at every day." Nia nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "I want to be part of that fight. Not just for me, but for everyone who doesn't have someone to stand up for them." Vanessa felt a surge of pride. "You already are, sweetheart, and you're making a bigger difference than you know." In the weeks that followed, Vanessa found moments to reflect on everything that had happened. She thought about Langston's decision to come forward, a gesture that had cost him his spotless reputation, but had also given the town a chance to start fresh. She thought about Officer Cruz, who had risked everything to stand on the right side of history. And she thought about the protesters, the community leaders, and the countless individuals who had joined together to demand change. Clearwood was far from perfect, but it was growing, evolving. The cracks that had once divided the town were slowly being mended, not through quick fixes, but through honest conversations and collective effort. One day, as Vanessa walked through the town square, she noticed a mural being painted on the side of a building. It depicted a group of diverse figures standing together, their faces turned toward the horizon. At the center of the mural was a young girl holding a sign that read, "Justice for all." Vanessa paused, her heart swelling with emotion. The artist, a local teenager, looked up and smiled. "It's for everyone who stood up and didn't back down," he said. "It's beautiful," Vanessa replied. She took a step back, letting the image sink in. As she continued down the street, she passed familiar faces, people who had been part of the protests, volunteers who had helped organize meetings, and neighbors who had come together in ways she hadn't thought possible. Each interaction, no matter how small, felt like a reminder of what they had accomplished together. By the time Vanessa returned home, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in months. She knew there would always be more work to do, more battles to fight, but for now, she allowed herself a moment to breathe, to appreciate the progress they had made. That night, as she tucked Nia into bed, Vanessa whispered, "You've taught me more about bravery than I ever thought possible." Nia smiled sleepily. "I learned from the best." Vanessa kissed her forehead, her heart full of gratitude and hope. As she turned off the light and stepped into the hallway, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fight for justice in Clearwood was far from over, but it was no longer a solitary effort. It was a shared mission, carried by a community that refused to give up. And for Vanessa, that was the greatest victory of all.